Hello everybody, hope you're doing well. Today I'm going to be doing an album review of the new PAYSAGE album, I'm WALD. This album is something that I've been trying to review for quite a while, but it's taken me a long time purely because of not only me being busy, but because of the length of this album. By the way, I'm going to be saying right here, or this track, or this album, because I already have a pretty much an incomprehensible accent, so me attempting to also do a foreign accent on top of my Geordie accent's just going to make you go, what is he on about? This artist has not only been releasing a lot of albums under the name PAYSAGE, but has also released albums under the alias Dark Space. I haven't tried any of Dark Space, I'll be honest, but I understand it's supposed to be very solid atmospheric black metal, and atmospheric black metal is mostly what PAYSAGE is too, albeit there is a few elements of other different styles of metal I've came across when trying to prepare for this review. I've went and listened to quite a few different albums, and yeah, I've noticed that he's got not only elements of doom metal and maybe a bit death metal, but there's a strong sort of element to not only ambient music but especially dungeon synth, both of which has been around in black metal for quite a while, at least since he's been starting to release music, and has been consistent throughout the releases that this person has been making music. Not only that, but I feel that he's been making incorporations of ambient music to mainly set a sound, like a soundscape, and particularly with that, it's not so much the ambience, but also at the same time the nature and field recordings, which is really prominent throughout all of the tracks on not only this album but a lot of older albums too. Since I'm quite new to this artist, I want to give a shout out to a few albums that he's released. For those of you who haven't tried him or are also new to the discography, I want to give a shout out first off to this album, which I think overall is one of the best ambient albums I've heard for a long time. Especially look at the castle, it reminds me a lot of Donkey Kong Country 2, this particular stage. That's one of my favourite songs that I've heard from PAYSAGE. But also I want to give a shout out to this album, which is absolutely brutal. There's also this album too, which is half black metal and half the sounds of some scavenger trekking along a wintry tundra. And also this album too, which is a self-titled record, I believe, and this is what most people consider the greatest album that PAYSAGE has released. But anyways, what do I think of I'm WALD? Well, this has been, I believe, 7 years in the making. At least there's been 7 years since the previous album released under this name. And, well, is it worth the wait? The thing's 2 hours, like I mentioned previously. And is it worth that? Absolutely, because not only is all of the tracks mainly extremely consistently good in quality, but at the same time, I think this is really the moment where this artist has been able to make something which is purely a soundscape, because of its length, it really feels like a film in a sort of music form. I feel a lot of sort of Tolkien-esque elements, which I know is nothing new to black metal, but really listening to this, for some reason I've always thought of battles, and whilst the previous albums have all been their own little battles, I feel that I'm WALD is like an all-out war, the start to the finish. Going on to the first track, and especially the second track, it just sounds like two armies fighting with each other. And then the third track, which is this beautiful ambient passage, which is mostly just scattered glittering guitars, it kind of makes me feel like there's just this long tracking motion of just the result of a huge battle, and just all of the corpses and decay and ruin just scattered all over this landscape. And I get this a lot with this album. I just really imagine images in my head, and I think that any album that's able to do that for me is certainly worth recommending, because it takes a lot of talent basically to make me just close my eyes and really imagine a picture of some sort. I know that winter and just general coldness is a huge theme with a lot of PAYSAGE to HIVER records, and I get that too, of course, here. But for some reason, I've always thought of war with this album. I think it's also just the sound of it too, because not only is it extremely brittle and just fast paced and really invigorating, but I think just the sounds to it too, especially the drumming, which throughout the whole thing is absolutely impeccable and just mind blowing, especially if you're new to drumming being done this quick. It's ridiculous. And some parts to it kind of sound like a war drummer too, which again kind of makes us feel why I do about the war elements. But imagine that drum roll isn't just for 10 seconds, it's going on for nearly 2 hours. The drumming is just unbelievable. I can't believe someone's able to do that for 10-minute, 30-minute intervals, which is the typical sort of duration of this album. The whole record's very lo-fi and really adds to the elements. Sometimes the guitars are quite hard to decipher between the guitars themselves and the wind and the other soundscapes that's going on, and also the vocals too, which 95% of the time is done in this sort of whisper quiet and also shrieked at the same time vocals, which sometimes blends in with the wind too. So it overall really creates this atmosphere of black metal, I know, where you just feel freezing. Despite this album technically coming out in June, I feel that my rooms became 20 degrees colder. Many of the tracks are just extremely really hellish sounding, particularly I'd say the majority of the second track, the fourth track as well, which is just colossal in its sound in my opinion, especially the drums at the start, which are just proper bashing away.
Flatten down the dough.
Also really enjoy the quieter moments too. Some parts I feel go on a bit too long. There's this track, for example, which I don't think is very entertaining, especially for its length. There's also this track too, which is mostly just guitar feedback. Kind of sounds like not so much an interlude, but just sounds like, I'm afraid, a guy just kind of playing with feedback on a guitar. It's not really needed, it's not really necessary. But there are moments like the track I mentioned with the sort of glistening guitar parts. And there's also other moments in this album where I would honestly say it's very evocative and quite cerebral, very cathartic as well, and some of the most cathartic music I've heard, at least in this year. The ones that I want to give a particular shout out in terms of beautiful moments, I'd say, on this album is this track, which not only has these wonderful operatic sort of vocals, but at the same time it has this great synth which comes in a bit later, which really adds to the atmosphere and gives it a sort of cinematic quality. There's also this track, which is probably my favourite. Not only does it have catchy moments, I'd say, like generally catchy moments, because the drumming, especially the cymbal hits, plays off with the vocals, where the vocals will kind of say a line and then there'll be a cymbal crash. So it actually makes it quite catchy. But later on in the track, there's this absolutely gorgeous synthesizer. I don't know if it's a synthesizer or an arpeggiator, but it kind of goes down, so and it's just beautiful. It's one of the most heavenly things I've heard in an album so far this year. It's generally amazing. There's also this track too, which harkens back to my quick mention of doom metal. I feel that because of the tempo, but at the same time, I suppose as well, the guitar parts, they're a bit more chugging. I think not only makes it a really good track in itself, because the guitars, the riffs are all really well done, but at the same time gives a bit variation too. And I think variation is something that someone might have a problem with this, because I know that even though I'm not the biggest connoisseur of black metal, but I understand that especially nowadays there's a lot of black metal which incorporates a lot of ideas, instrumentations, and you might think with these track lengths that there'll be a lot of variation in sounds, but although there is some progression, if you listen quite closely, you will find that there's a lot of repetition in the riffs and such like that. So it kind of it's on a weird balance. It's between finding something sort of hypnotizing, but at the same time you might find it a bit boring. But at first, I'll be honest, when I heard this album, I was a bit bored. I was kind of thinking this isn't getting anywhere. But it does just kind of make you teleport into a different world, at least a different, colder world, when you really get into it. Whether or not that you really need to pay attention to it or have it in the background to make it do that for you, I think it just depends on the listener. But it really works for me very well. I mean, yeah, talking about repetition, the riffs are quite repetitive. And again, you might find it, I suppose, boring in a way because the riffs not only repeat, but they're quite short. So it depends. If you don't enjoy the riff, you're going to be hearing it for a long time. And luckily, I enjoy the majority of the riffs here. Is there any issues with this album? Does it need to be cut down? Yeah, I mean, like I say, this track I think could have been abbreviated. I think the last track, although is quite cinematic and works quite well, it feels like an end to the journey because if you listen closely, the sort of nature recordings at the start of this track not only has wind sounding, but like a bell, so it almost feels like someone's went on this huge journey and they finally reached home or some sort of life. But at the same time, I don't think it's worth the 19 minutes in length. In fact, the first track, which I know was released as a single, it's probably ended up becoming one of my least favourite too. It's not that it's bad or anything, but just because I just prefer other tracks, to be honest. And I also think the synthesizer used in here doesn't really fit too well. Other things as well, I think that the production might be a bit hit and miss for some people. I'm used to listening to very lo-fi records, whether it be lo-fi indie or some form of indie rock, and especially, of course, black metal, especially older black metal releases. But at the same time, I think the production's a bit funny, especially with the drumming, because the cymbal crashes are usually the only things that actually sort of spread out in different left and right channels. I mean, on one hand, it helps bring the drumming some attention, which it really deserves, of course, because it's fantastic, like I've said. But at the same time, because very, very rarely is any of the other instruments or the vocals actually spread out in a sort of stereo panned way, it just makes it stand out in a quite weird way. But that's just my opinion. And I think that's basically it from what I can say. If any of this sounds like your cup of tea, then be warned, it will take a lot of listening, never mind the duration of the album itself. But for me, it's taken a lot of listens to really appreciate the full album and its scope. So if you got some time on your hands and you're willing to dedicate yourself to a musical project, which I think has a lot of layers to it, and you will get a lot out of it if you give it time and patience, then please check out this album. Yeah, I think I could trim and abbreviate some sections on this album, but I think for just an overall accomplishment, it's fantastic. It's worth a shot and definitely is worth my recommendation overall. I'm going to give this 8 out of 10. So thank you very much for watching, everybody. I hope you're all doing very well. Apologies again for the delay of this album review and my reviews in general, but I hope to bring you guys some more videos in the not too distant future. So, like I say, once again, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you later. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening.
Holla, holla if you hear me.